If you come into our state and you kill one of our children, you kill a police officer, you are involved with another crime and you kill one of our citizens, you will face the ultimate justice in the state of Texas, and that is you will be executed.
What do you make of what do you make of that dynamic just happened here? The mention of the execution of 234 people drew applause.
I think Americans understand justice.
Well, that's totally chilling. Two things about that quote from Perry, and we'll talk about Buck in a second. One was, I love how he sort of boasts about the fact you can even go up to the Supreme Court, as if this is a special aspect of Texas justice. That, you know, we even allow the federal court to oversee our justice.
Going to the Supreme Court, it means there's a serious problem with this case.
Exactly, particularly when the Supreme Court, I mean, I know my wife clerked on the Supreme Court, actually, and I'm familiar with the routineness with which death penalty appeals go up to the Supreme Court, and they essentially are almost never accepted in their state, so it's very rare that happens. I also thought it was so interesting in that quote, that one line, which sort of to me gets at the emotional core of this issue. He says, if you come into Texas and kill one of our citizens, I mean, presumably there's lots of people who kill citizens who are already in Texas, right? I mean, but if you come into Texas, it has this kind of the invasion of the other, right? Totally. It's the person showing up at the door. That is the kind of emotional core of that stuff that you saw there. And I don't know, Bob. I was really upset by that moment and by what happened this week.
That term reminds me of that old term, outside agitators, back in the civil rights era. You know, everything is fine as long as these folks don't come from elsewhere and come in here and foul up the works.
Michael, do you think? Here's my liberal fantasy. My liberal fantasy is that conservatives who are skeptical of government power, who think the government screws up everything, would apply the same principle to the government executing people, and that there would be some, he would have to pay some political price for what happened with Dwayne Buck this week and the rebuke that was essentially issued. Is that a fantasy?
It's a little bit of a fantasy. I mean, there are a core of conservatives. There are a core of conservatives who do look into these things and do think that the justice system can be just as fouled up as the Department of Health and Human Services or something like that. But there's a core of conservatism going back really centuries that looks skeptically at the newer functions of government in the last century, which they label social engineering, etc. But they look on the older functions of the state, the military, the courts,
and wrestling up a posse,
and police, very favorably.
Right.
So I don't think you're going to ever get across the board all conservatives being as skeptical. But I think they can be much more skeptical than they are.
Well, but did that moment surprise you? Did the applause moment surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me in one sense. I actually think I was chilled by it too, as you were. But I think we're missing something, is that I think for a lot of people, they were applauding exactly what Perry said they were. They were applauding justice being done. And they were applauding it being done coldly and without apology. And they like that aspect. They weren't cheering the death itself. They were cheering the justice. But it's very hard to make a distinction.
I think it's hard to disentangle those.
No, it is very hard. And that's why it felt chilling to hear it.
And that's why, and I thought, what were you going to say, Bob? Sorry.
Yeah, I just think that there's sort of and not limited to Texas by any means, a lust for killing in this society as an answer to serious problems that we haven't come to grips with yet.
But here's the issue. Here's the reason that I was surprised by that, I will say. I've been, you know, when I was, you know, if you look back at the 80s and 90s, if you look at the 60s, 70s, and 90s, so you have this massive spike in crime, a real increase in spike. I mean, when I was growing up in New York, it was 2,000, 2,100 murders, right? It's down to, what is it, 600 now, something around there. So there was a real crime problem in this country, and that gave birth to this sort of tough on crime rhetoric, this law and order wedge issue. And I held out this liberal fantasy that the sort of poison was draining from that. As the crime wave as crime came down in this country, and you see it, it's no longer the forefront of our politics. You know, Michael Dukakis got asked a question about the death penalty in 1988, and no Democratic president has ever been anti-death penalty again, probably because of it. So it's completely been removed from our politics. But I held out the hope that there was a possibility that meant that we were going to see on the right more skepticism towards not just the death penalty, but the entire sort of edifice we've constructed around criminal justice. And that moment just made me totally despair.
Well, there may also be just, and this is really crass to say, but it may just be that the Republican constituency doesn't feel like they're on this side of the law and justice system. Whereas, you know,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Explain that point.
Well, what I'm saying, though, is that, you know, the demographics of the Republican Party are older, whiter, more suburban.
Right.
This is not a place where you're getting no-knock raids at night. This is not a place where you're getting pulled over for driving while black.
Right.
This, you know, this Republican voters are on the other side of the law and justice issue. They want to defend cops. They want to defend prison guards. They want to defend even prison industrial companies.
Right. So many capitalists to the core.
There may literally just be a problem of the demographics where literally there aren't Republican voters that are worried about this.
And the personal experience of it. I think there's just tremendous social distance that exists between the people that experience are on the other side of the spear of the criminal justice system, the people that are walking around Harlem and you know, getting tossed over a police car to get frisked, and the people that feel like someone out there is keeping them safe and administering justice.
Except if you go into high crime areas, and I remember one time, a long time ago in Brooklyn, I encountered this, and you talk to people about the crime problem, and you say, well, what do you want?
Yeah, those are the toughest on crime folks ever.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. You will hear some
scare
things.
you.
Yeah. There's actually a new documentary about another Texas execution. It's far more troubling than the Buck case. A man lost his 3 daughters in a fire. Texas executed him for setting the fire, and subsequent investigations show almost definitively the fire was not, in fact, arson.